What would you do if you stepped into your own backyard and found a group of strangers throwing a pool party in your pond? Because that's exactly what happened to me. One moment, I was carrying a tray of iced tea, looking forward to a quiet afternoon by the water. The next, I was standing frozen in shock as a sweaty man in neon swim trunks launched himself off my patio steps, midair in a cannonball position, grinning like a lunatic king about to claim his throne. Water exploded in every direction, drenching my porch, my carefully arranged flower beds, and most importantly, me. I barely had time to process what I was seeing before I noticed the two kids paddling around in inflatable flamingo tubes, splashing my koi fish like they were contestants in some backyard water Olympics. A family had set up a full-blown barbecue near my shed, flipping burgers like they were hosting a tailgate party. To my right, a teenager with a portable speaker blasted obnoxiously loud music, turning my once serene pond into a noisy public beach. And there, sitting boldly in my deck chair, sipping something pink through a ridiculous bendy straw, was Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA. She tilted her oversized sunglasses down just enough to smirk at me. "Lovely day for a swim, isn't it?" she said, swirling her drink like she had invited me to her backyard instead of the other way around. I gripped the tray tighter, trying to keep my voice steady. "Karen. What the hell is happening?" "Oh, Mason, don't be so dramatic," she replied, waving a hand dismissively. "It's community spirit." I looked at my pond, the one I had spent years cultivating. The once crystal water was now clouded with sunscreen and pool toy debris. Lily pads were crushed, and my precious koi fish darted nervously under the surface, trying to escape the chaos. 2 weeks ago, this place had been my retreat. A small pond, surrounded by lush plants, visited by birds, frogs, and my favorite local duck, quackers. Every morning, I'd sit by the water with my coffee, listening to the croaking of frogs and the gentle rustling of reeds. Every evening, I'd wind down to the quiet splash of my koi gliding through the water. And now? It looked like a public swimming pool during spring break. I turned back to Karen, my patience hanging by a thread. "Get out," she gasped, placing a hand over her chest in fake offense. "Oh, Mason, you really don't understand, do you?" She reached down, pulled a laminated sign from under her chair, and smugly held it up like a game show host revealing a grand prize. "Community pond, open for public use." My stomach dropped. Karen grinned wider, thrilled at my horror. "Welcome to your brand new neighborhood water feature." I stared at the laminated sign in Karen's hands, my grip tightening around the tray of iced tea as my brain scrambled to process what I was seeing. Community pond, my private backyard pond, the one I built, maintained, and loved, was now some kind of HOA-funded water park? Karen tilted her head, pretending to be sympathetic. "I understand this might be a little unexpected for you, Mason. But you have to see the bigger picture. The neighborhood needed a place like this. You can't just hoard a beautiful pond all to yourself when so many families could enjoy it." I opened my mouth to argue, but a group of kids suddenly came running through my flower beds, trampling through the soil as they bolted toward the pond. One of them, a freckled boy in swim trunks, launched himself off my deck steps into the water, sending another wave splashing onto my patio. I turned back to Karen, seething, "This is my property." "Oh, Mason," she sighed dramatically, "we had a vote. It was overwhelmingly in favor of the change. Turns out, a lot of people thought it was selfish for you to keep such a wonderful feature to yourself." The HOA board agreed, it only made sense to designate it as a shared space. "A vote?" I echoed. "When was this vote?" "Oh," Karen smirked, swirling her ridiculous pink drink, "it was a closed HOA meeting. You must have missed the notice." My blood boiled. There had been no notice, no warning, no emails, no flyers. This wasn't a community decision. This was Karen's decision, and now my peaceful backyard was a chaotic nightmare. And somehow, she wasn't finished. A few days later, as I tried to salvage what was left of my yard, I noticed something odd. New faces, people I had never seen before were wandering into my backyard like they had some official right to be there. A couple set up lounge chairs by the pond, chatting casually as if it were a public park. A man in a polo and sunglasses led his golden retriever right through my garden, letting it pee on my shrubs. Then I saw it. A small, discreet sign had been nailed to my fence near the walking path. In Karen's unmistakable handwriting, it read, "Pond membership available, contact HOA for access." My jaw clenched. I stormed back inside, pulled up the HOA website, and there it was, **** Karen had listed my pond as a paid amenity, ***. She was charging new residents for access to my backyard. $50 a month for priority use, whatever that meant. I scrolled down, feeling my pulse hammering. A payment link, a full pricing structure. Karen was making money off my property. Fury burned through me. I marched straight to her house, pounding on the door. She answered with her usual smug expression, dressed in an expensive floral blouse, holding a fresh glass of wine. "Mason," she purred, "what a surprise. Here to thank me for raising your property value? You're charging people to use my backyard, Karen," I barked. ***, are you insane? ***. She took a leisurely sip of her wine. "I wouldn't say, charging. Think of it as a community maintenance fund. Keeping a pond in top shape isn't cheap, Mason. You of all people should know that." I gritted my teeth. I am not maintaining this for strangers. "Well," she sighed, feigning disappointment, "I suppose you don't have to. But wouldn't it be embarrassing if your pond started looking neglected? People might start to complain." I clenched my fists. "This is extortion." Karen raised her eyebrows, her smirk widening. "Oh, Mason. Don't be so dramatic. It's just business." I wanted to scream. But before I could, I caught something even worse. Over her shoulder, inside her house, I saw a printed-out flyer on the counter. The heading read, "Neighborhood Safety Alert, Concern Regarding Mason Harper." My stomach dropped. I shoved past her, snatching the paper before she could stop me. My own name stared back at me in bold black letters, followed by an entirely fabricated warning. "Recently, concerns have been raised regarding Mr. Mason Harper's unpredictable behavior. Please exercise caution when engaging in discussions regarding community regulations. HOA encourages residents to report any unusual or hostile encounters." I turned to Karen, my hands shaking with rage. "You're spreading lies about me now?" She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Mason. I didn't say anything untrue. I just warned people that you're a little uncooperative." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to grab her stupid wine glass and chuck it into her manicured lawn. Instead, I took a slow breath and stepped back onto her porch. I had two choices. 1, fight Karen head-on, which would only make me look exactly like the hostile neighbor she was painting me as. 2, outplay her. I forced myself to smile. "You know what, Karen? You're right. I've been a little difficult." She blinked, caught off guard. "Oh?" I nodded, shoving the flyer into my pocket. I should be more open-minded. Maybe I just need to embrace the community spirit. She beamed, convinced she had won. "Oh, Mason, I knew you'd come around." I turned to leave, already forming a plan. If Karen wanted community spirit, I was about to give it to her. In the loudest, messiest, most chaotic way possible. I spent the next day watching the chaos unfold, my anger simmering beneath the surface as more and more strangers paraded through my backyard like it was some kind of luxury resort. Families arrived with coolers and picnic baskets, claiming spots around my pond. A couple even brought a pop-up tent, settling in for what looked like an entire afternoon. Karen had turned my private sanctuary into a public attraction, and worst of all, she was profiting from it. But if Karen thought I was just going to roll over and let it happen, she had seriously underestimated me. I had spent years cultivating this pond, making it a thriving habitat for wildlife. If Karen wanted community spirit, then she was about to get a crash course in natural ecosystems. That evening, under the cover of darkness, I drove to a local farm supply store. The cashier barely blinked as I loaded crate after crate of frogs into my truck, probably assumed I was starting some kind of weird hobby. By the time I got back, it was nearly midnight. The neighborhood was quiet, asleep, completely unaware of what was coming. I opened the crates carefully, releasing dozens of croaking frogs into my pond. The effect was instantaneous. The air filled with loud, deep croaks, bouncing off the water and echoing across the yard. Some frogs immediately dove into the pond, vanishing beneath the surface. Others perched on lily pads, blinking in the moonlight. I watched, satisfied, knowing that by morning, Karen's precious community pool was about to become a nightmare. And I was right. The first screams started at 7:30 a.m. I stepped onto my deck, sipping my coffee, as the scene unfolded beautifully. A group of kids who had eagerly rushed into the water came bolting out just as fast, shrieking at the top of their lungs. One of them had a massive bullfrog clinging to his arm, his face twisted in sheer terror. A woman near the shore jumped backward, shaking her foot violently as a slimy green visitor landed on her sandal. One by one, families began grabbing their things and fleeing, their idyllic morning at the pond completely ruined. Then Karen emerged from her house, still in her HOA-branded robe, looking like she had just swallowed a lemon. She stormed up to my deck, arms crossed, her face a perfect mask of controlled fury. "What the hell did you do, Mason?" she hissed. I took a slow sip of my coffee, fighting back a smug smile. "Oh, Karen, I'm just embracing the natural ecosystem." Her eye twitched. "This is sabotage." I feigned offense. "Sabotage? Karen, these are native species, frogs are fantastic for pest control. And let's not forget, you said this is a community space now." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing she had no immediate argument. For a glorious few days, my plan worked perfectly. The pond, once filled with splashing and laughter, now sat eerily abandoned. The sound of constant croaking had driven everyone away. But Karen? She wasn't done. I woke up one morning to the sound of footsteps in my yard. Rushing outside, I found a crew of workers in rubber boots, hauling in hoses and cleaning supplies. One of them was using a giant net to scoop up my frogs, dumping them into plastic bins. Another sprayed some kind of chemical cleaner onto the rocks, scrubbing furiously. And there, at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, was Karen. I stormed toward her, my blood boiling. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She barely glanced at me. "Oh, Mason. Relax. The HOA has generously covered the costs of a full pond sanitation. This place has become a health hazard. We can't have the community getting sick, now can we?" I watched, horrified, as a worker plucked a frog off a lily pad and chucked it into a plastic bucket. "You can't just remove wildlife like this," I snapped. Karen turned, smirking. "I called animal control. They'll find these creatures a nice swamp to live in." My fists clenched. Karen had declared war. She had taken my koi, my duck, and now she was coming for my frogs. And worst of all, she was using HOA funds to do it, meaning everyone in the neighborhood was unknowingly paying for her personal vendetta against me. I had had enough. Karen thought she could erase everything I built, turn my pond into some sterile HOA-controlled playground. She thought she had won. But she had made a mistake. She had poked the bear one too many times. And I was about to unleash absolute chaos. I didn't waste a second. As soon as Karen's so-called cleanup crew finished scrubbing my pond of every last frog and smothering the natural ecosystem with whatever chemical cocktail they had dumped into the water, I set my next plan into motion. If Karen wanted my backyard to be a perfectly controlled, HOA-approved community space, she was about to get a wildlife sanctuary on steroids. The next morning, I drove to a local wildlife rescue organization, one I had called the night before. They specialized in rehoming abandoned domestic ducks, the kind that clueless people bought as pets, only to abandon them once they realized they weren't cute little ducklings forever. I took 15. They were a mix of sizes and colors, some tiny and excitable, others big, lazy, and loud. But all of them were spectacularly noisy. By the time I unloaded the last crate and let them waddle freely into my pond, I knew I had struck gold. The moment they hit the water, they owned it. They paddled furiously, splashed around, and quacked like they were running a full-scale political protest. Some immediately climbed onto the rocks, flapping their wings dramatically. Others waddled onto the grass, pecking at anything they could find. And the best part? They did not shut up. From sunrise to sundown, the air was filled with a symphony of quacks. Deep ones. High-pitched ones. Echoing calls that carried across the entire neighborhood. I had effectively turned my pond into a chaotic, feathered kingdom. And Karen had no idea. Until she showed up the next afternoon. She arrived in full HOA mode, dressed in a freshly pressed polo shirt, clipboard in hand, ready to inspect the pond's progress after her precious sanitation project. I watched from my deck, hiding my smirk, as she froze in her tracks. The ducks were everywhere. One particularly large, bossy-looking duck waddled straight up to Karen's pristine white sneakers, let out a deafening quack, and snapped its beak at her ankle. Karen yelped, stumbling backward. "What the hell is this?" I took a long sip of my coffee. "Oh, just a natural addition to the ecosystem, Karen." She gawked at the pond, her jaw tight. "You can't just dump a flock of filthy birds in the water." "Actually," I said smoothly, **** ducks are fantastic for maintaining aquatic ecosystems, *** they eat pests. Keep algae under control, they're just doing their part for the community." Her expression twisted into something between rage and horror as the ducks continued their unrelenting quacking, completely unbothered by her presence. For the first time, Karen didn't have an immediate comeback. She stormed away, her clipboard clutched in a death grip, and I knew she was about to pull something drastic. I just didn't expect it to be so grand. The next morning, flyers were plastered all over the neighborhood. HOA Summer Barbecue, Community Pond Celebration. Karen had gone nuclear. She wasn't just trying to reclaim the pond, she was turning it into the centerpiece of her biggest HOA event of the year. By noon, my yard was overrun. People arrived with folding chairs, coolers, and bags of chips. Someone had set up a bounce house on my lawn. A massive grill station appeared near my shed, with HOA volunteers flipping burgers like they were working a state fair. Worst of all, a local news crew was there, cameras rolling as Karen paraded around, shaking hands, smiling like a damn politician. I stood on my deck, staring in disbelief, as she waved dramatically toward the pond. She was winning. Until nature decided to intervene. Because as Karen started her big, self-important speech, something incredible happened. The frog eggs that had been left behind before her cleaning crew arrived, hatched. And suddenly, hundreds of tiny froglets emerged from the water at the worst possible moment. It started small, just one leaping onto a picnic table. Then another, hopping onto someone's plate of potato salad. A woman screamed as one landed on her shoulder. Then, absolute chaos, The frogs swarmed the barbecue like a tiny amphibian army, leaping into cups, onto folding chairs, into people's laps. Children shrieked. A man in khakis flung his drink into the air, drenching Karen's perfect polo shirt in iced tea. The ducks, spooked by the commotion, began flapping wildly, quacking at full volume, chasing the frogs like it was a bizarre live-action nature documentary. A woman tripped over a lawn chair. Someone spilled an entire tray of hot dogs into the grass. And right in the middle of it all, Karen stood frozen in sheer horror, watching her grand event descend into madness, Her face turned red, her fists clenched, and then she turned to me, eyes blazing with fury. You think this is funny, Mason? She screeched, her hair disheveled, her once perfect outfit stained with barbecue sauce and regret. I took a leisurely sip of lemonade. "Oh, Karen," I said, smiling. "I think it's fantastic." Her hands trembled with rage. "I'm calling the HOA board. This is sabotage." I leaned against the railing. "You should do that," I mused. "I think they'll love to hear about how you used HOA funds for an unauthorized pond cleanup, trespassed on private property, and illegally declared my yard a community space." Her face went pale. I tapped my phone screen, where security footage from my yard was clearly displayed. Her mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. She had lost. For the first time since this nightmare started, Karen had no power over me. She whipped around, storming off in defeat, her dream of ruling my backyard in shambles. And as the chaos continued behind her, as people scrambled to escape the frog-infested barbecue, I knew one thing for certain. I had won. The fallout from Karen's disastrous HOA barbecue was immediate. She had tried to turn my backyard into the jewel of the neighborhood, but instead, it became the site of the most humiliating event of her reign. News spread fast, faster than even she could contain it. By the next morning, neighbors whispered in hushed tones, recounting the chaos of screaming guests, airborne frogs, and panicked ducks. Karen had prided herself on control, but for the first time, she had completely lost it, and everyone saw it happen. I thought she would retreat, lick her wounds, and move on, but Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. A crisp envelope appeared in my mailbox the next day, a formal notice from the HOA demanding that I pay for half the costs of the pond sanitation project she had orchestrated. The bill was laughable, padded with ridiculous expenses like specialized frog removal services and sanitization of aquatic features. It was clear this was her last attempt at revenge, a desperate move to make me suffer one final time. I refused to pay. Days later, I saw Karen slinking through the neighborhood, whispering to her loyal supporters. I knew she was spinning her own version of events, painting me as some unhinged pond-loving menace. But this time, people weren't so quick to side with her. The barbecue disaster had broken her hold on the neighborhood. No one wanted another fiasco like that on their property, and suddenly, my selfish refusal to share the pond didn't seem like such a crime anymore. When she tried to hold a last-minute HOA meeting, I came prepared. As Karen stood at the front of the clubhouse, acting like she still had power, I simply pulled out my phone and played the footage, her unauthorized cleanup crew, her misuse of HOA funds, her blatant lies about community votes. A murmur spread through the room. Someone whispered about financial misconduct. Another neighbor muttered, "She's been doing this for years." The HOA board announced an investigation, and before the meeting was even over, Karen stormed out, red-faced and humiliated. But she wasn't done. A week later, a city inspector arrived at my door, clipboard in hand. Apparently, Karen had filed a report, claiming my pond was an unregulated wetland and a potential environmental hazard. If I couldn't prove otherwise, I'd have to drain it entirely. She wanted to wipe out everything I had built. But her plan backfired spectacularly. Because, after a bit of research, I discovered that certain species of frogs that had lived in my pond were actually protected under environmental law. With the help of a wildlife expert, I gathered documentation proving that my backyard had become a legally protected habitat. The city inspector took one look at the report and shut down Karen's complaint immediately. Not only could the HOA never touch my pond again, but Karen had unknowingly given me permanent protection over my own backyard. She had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she had made my pond untouchable. At the next HOA vote, Karen was removed as president. She was forced to pay back the money she had funneled into her private, cleaning crew. Her once loyal supporters scattered, unwilling to go down with her. She had lost everything. And my backyard? It was finally mine again. The ducks stayed, now fully claiming the pond as their domain. The frogs continued their nightly symphony, their croaks a reminder of the perfect chaos that had driven Karen away. Even my koi fish, once terrified by the commotion, began gliding peacefully through the water again. And one evening, as I sat on my deck, a familiar waddle caught my eye. Quackers had returned. He hopped onto the grass, let out a single, satisfied quack, then settled in by the pond like he had never left. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was finally over. As a final touch, I made one last addition to my fence, a small but satisfying piece of revenge. A wooden sign, hand-painted in bold letters. Mason's Pond, wildlife only. Must request entry. I knew Karen would hate it. And honestly, that made it even better. Have you ever fought back against an HOA, or a Karen, and won? Share your stories below. I'd love to hear who had it worse.